Have you ever looked at someone you love and thought this is home? That was me, 15 days after giving birth. The house smelled of milk and soft blankets. The air still carried the echo of my baby's first cry. I was sore, swollen, and sleepless, yet my heart was full. I believed love, the kind we dream of, had finally chosen me. Gideon, my husband, was gentle then. He whispered promises against the quiet of our new nights. When he held our son, light seemed to rest on his shoulders like grace itself. I thought, this is how forever begins. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. His eyes no longer lingered when he looked at me. His touch became a passing thought. The man who once traced my scars with tenderness now measured his silence in hours. The distance between us grew like a shadow that moved even when the lamps were lit. I still remember one evening, the sun spilling gold across the nursery wall, my baby breathing softly beside me, and Gideon's phone glowing in his hand longer than usual. I told myself not to notice, not to imagine. But even love can hear the tremor in its own heartbeat when something isn't right. I didn't know then that the quietest moments often hide the loudest betrayals, and that the peace I felt that day, warm and fragile, was the beginning of everything that would one day break. If this story resonates with you, subscribe to Voices of Sister Seraphine. Here, every story is a whisper of strength, and every woman finds a voice that echoes her own. I had imagined that moment 1,000 times the first cry, the small, trembling breath of the child I had carried through pain and fear. When it came, it was nothing like I expected. It was raw, sharp, alive. It sliced through the silence of the delivery room like lightning breaking through a storm. And I, exhausted and broken open, felt something ancient awaken inside me. The nurses said I had done well. Gideon stood beside the bed, holding our son, smiling in a way that should have comforted me. But there was something distant in his eyes, like a man staring into a painting he couldn't quite understand. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "You did it, Seraphine." Yet his voice trembled not with joy, but with the unease of someone already halfway gone. That night, as I lay in the sterile glow of the hospital lights, I listened to my baby's breathing. Every sound was fragile and new, but inside, I felt the quiet weight of something else, a stillness too heavy for such a tender beginning. They say new mothers see light everywhere, in the baby's eyes, in the morning sun, in the promise of tomorrow. But I saw both light and shadow. And though I tried to ignore it, I already knew. Some joys arrive with warnings folded inside them. The weeks after coming home blurred into one another. A carousel of milk, sleepless nights, and whispers of gratitude I tried to believe. Gideon was there, but always slightly apart. He moved through the house like a guest, afraid to disturb the furniture. I told myself he was tired. New fathers often are. He still brought me tea, still smiled for the neighbors, still posted a picture of our son wrapped in a soft blue blanket. But something had changed in the way his hand brushed mine. Once steady, now hesitant, as if affection had become a duty. At night, when I woke to feed our baby, I'd find him scrolling through his phone under the dim light. His thumb moved fast, his expression unreadable. Sometimes he'd tilt the screen away when I looked. I told myself it was nothing. Love, I believed, was built on trust, and trust meant not looking too closely. But even trust has ears. And in the stillness between two cries, I began to hear the silence speak. Sometimes, I thought, the beginning of betrayal is not a scream, it's the quiet you pretend not to notice. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face was pale, my hair tangled, my body marked by motherhood's honest brutality, stretch marks like rivers, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. For the first time, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. I remembered how Gideon used to call me beautiful in the mornings, when light touched my skin. Now he said nothing at all. He came home late, smelled faintly of cologne I didn't know, and brushed off questions with soft lies. "It's work, Seraphine. Just work." I wanted to believe him, so I did. Because believing was easier than breaking. That evening, I was bathing our son when I noticed the door slightly open. A shape passed by a quick flicker of movement and the faint click of a lock. When I stepped into the hallway, Gideon's phone was in his hand. He looked up, startled, then smiled too quickly. "Just checking messages," he said. The mirror behind him caught a fragment of his reflection. A man divided between truth and performance. And in that half-second, I saw it. The distance, the unease, the guilt trying to hide beneath a familiar face. I understood then, I whispered to myself, that sometimes love does not disappear. It simply hides behind shadows, waiting to be named. It happened on a night like any other. Our baby had finally fallen asleep after hours of crying. I went to take a shower, craving 5 minutes of peace, of steam and silence. When I came out, the bathroom mirror fogged over, and through the mist I saw him, Gideon standing in the doorway, holding his phone, pointed at me. The towel slipped in my hands. For a second we both froze, suspended between innocence and violation. Then he lowered the phone, forced a laugh. "You look beautiful," he said. I just wanted to remember this moment. Something inside me went cold. It wasn't the words, it was the way he said them. Too rehearsed, too smooth. I asked him to delete it. He nodded, pretended to comply, showed me an empty gallery. But I knew that gallery was too clean, too quick. A lie wiped down with care. That night, while he slept beside me, I stared into the dark ceiling. I could almost hear the faint click again, echoing in my head. The sound of a shutter, the sound of trust breaking. I understood that night that there are wounds invisible to the skin, the kind that bleed in silence. When he went to shower the next morning, I took his phone. My fingers shook as I unlocked it, crossing a line I had sworn never to cross. Inside his messages, I found what I already feared. A group chat full of laughter, emojis, and my photo, my body, my shame, my trust, turned into a joke among men. They had written words that cut deeper than knives. "Look how she changed," one said, and then, below, a message from Gideon himself. "She used to be perfect. Now, well, I don't remember breathing. I don't remember crying. I only remember the sound of my heart folding in on itself." I took screenshots, every message, every proof. Not out of revenge, but because I needed to see it, to hold truth in my trembling hands. When I placed the phone back, it felt like setting down a weapon made of glass. I learned that morning that some truths don't shatter you, they carve you open, so you can finally stop pretending. Oh, that evening, I stood by the kitchen counter as Gideon chopped vegetables, humming faintly. I watched his hands, the same hands that had once wiped tears from my face, and I asked quietly, "How long have you been seeing Alara?" The knife stopped mid-air. He turned, eyes wide then narrowed. "Are you crazy?" he said. "You're imagining things again." His voice dripped with the same calm cruelty as the messages I had read. I didn't look away. "I saw everything," I said. "The photos, the messages." He exhaled, long and slow. And then he said the sentence that finally killed whatever love remained. "I needed it, Seraphine. You just don't attract me like before." The words hung there like smoke, poisonous, lingering. But inside me, something shifted. It wasn't despair. It was clarity. That night I understood. A woman's silence can be the sound of her strength gathering. I didn't scream. I didn't break plates or pled. I simply said, "I want a divorce." I did. His expression changed from arrogance to disbelief. He thought I would beg, that my love would bind me. But love, when wounded beyond repair, turns into something else, a will to survive. I packed a small bag for my son and me. Each folded blanket felt like closing a chapter. The baby's cry echoed through the room, and I realized that was the only voice worth answering. When I stepped out of that house, the night air hit me like baptism cold, pure, unforgiving. I didn't know where we would go, but I knew what I was leaving behind. A man who mistook cruelty for power and silence for consent. I understood then there are lies that hurt more than the truth because they teach you how little you were ever seen. Steam still clung to my skin when I stepped out of the shower. The air was damp and heavy, the scent of lavender soap still hovering between the tiles. For a moment I let myself believe the world outside that small bathroom didn't exist, that I was only a woman who had survived childbirth, who wanted to feel human again. Then the door creaked, a faint sound, so small that I might have imagined it, but my body stiffened before my mind could reason. He was there, Gideon. framed by the doorway, half in shadow, half in light. His face unreadable, his phone raised ever so slightly toward me. A single drop of water rolled down my shoulder and hit the floor. It sounded louder than his breath. Our eyes met, the air fractured. He lowered the phone too slowly, too carefully, like someone who knew he'd been caught. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice came out softer than I meant, almost gentle. He smiled, a small, practiced curve of his mouth. "You just looked so beautiful," he said. I wanted to remember this moment. There was no tenderness in his voice, just a hollow ease. I clutched the towel tighter. Something in me recoiled, though I didn't yet have a name for it. I wasn't afraid, just stripped of something invisible. Dignity, maybe. Safety. The right to be unseen. He moved closer, kissed my forehead and whispered, "Don't be mad. You're my wife. There's nothing wrong with it." His words brushed against me like cold fingers. I said nothing. Silence, I had learned, was sometimes the only protection left to a woman who didn't want to break in half. That night, I could still feel the echo of that moment in my chest, the weight of his gaze, the way the air had stopped breathing. Some violations don't bruise the skin. They bruise the soul, quietly, where no one can see. When I asked him later about the photo, he didn't flinch. He said it was gone. Deleted. He even showed me the empty gallery, scrolling through the blank space with such perfect calm that I almost doubted what I'd seen. "See?" he said. "You're imagining things. You've been under stress." The word stress stung like disinfectant on an open wound, cleaning nothing, only burning. I nodded, pretending to believe him. Pretending because that was easier than confronting the truth. I had no energy left for battles, not after nights of rocking the baby through endless crying, not after days of healing from stitches that still ached when I Saturday. But inside me, a different kind of ache began. One that no painkiller could touch. That night, when the baby finally slept, I lay beside Gideon. He scrolled on his phone again, the blue light carving his face into something unfamiliar. I watched the screen reflect off the ceiling, and for the first time, I felt afraid not of him, but of what he was capable of doing while looking so calm. It's strange how betrayal often looks like love, just without the warmth. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds in thin golden lines. I watched Gideon shave, humming under his breath. He looked so ordinary, clean, composed, the picture of a husband who had nothing to hide. But love sharpens perception. I noticed the subtle things. The way he angled his phone face down on the counter, how he carried it with him even to the laundry room, how the corners of his smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. When he left for work, I stood in the doorway, holding our baby. The house was too quiet. The scent of aftershave lingered like a ghost. I told myself I wouldn't look, that I would not be that woman, the one who snoops, who doubts, who breaks her own peace, searching for confirmation of pain. But peace built on lies is only silence wearing perfume. That afternoon, while the baby slept, I took his phone. My hands trembled as if they already knew the weight of what they would find. The photo was not gone. It was there, tucked away in a hidden folder, along with others. Angles I didn't remember, moments I hadn't known he captured. And then the message thread. A group chat, full of laughter, of emojis that screamed louder than words. My photo was there, my body, my postpartum body shared, captioned with a joke. "Look at this," Gideon had written. Motherhood hit hard. I stared, until the image blurred. My heart didn't race. It slowed, painfully, deliberately, as if each beat needed permission. I took screenshots, one by one. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. Proof that what I felt was real, that I hadn't imagined the shift in his voice, the cooling of his touch. When I placed the phone back exactly as I'd found it, I felt nothing. Not rage, not sorrow, just a clean white emptiness. Sometimes, the moment you discover the truth is the same moment you stop being the woman you were. For days, I said nothing. Gideon went about his routines as if nothing had happened, whistling, cooking, playing the role of a devoted husband for anyone who cared to look. But I began to watch him differently, not with love, but with observation. I studied the small absences, the way he turned his body away when I entered a room, the new shirts he bought, the smell of a perfume that wasn't mine, the late-night meetings that stretched into dawn. Once, he reached for the baby, but not for me. And that's when I realized something profound. A man can still share your roof, your bed, your name, and yet have already left you in every way that matters. He thought my silence meant weakness. But silence can also be strategy. I began to save money quietly. I updated my resume at night, feeding the baby with one arm while typing with the other. Each small act felt like a seed planted in secret soil. When love turns cruel, self-preservation becomes a form of prayer. It was a Sunday evening when the truth could no longer sit still. He was in the kitchen, cutting vegetables, humming again. I watched him from the doorway, the man who had mocked my body to strangers, who had turned intimacy into ammunition. "Gideon," I said. He looked up, smiled. "Yes, love?" The word love hung in the air like a bad perfume. "How long have you been seeing her?" He froze. "Her who?" "Elada," I said quietly. "Your co-worker." "Oh." He laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that cracks at the edges. "You're being ridiculous, Seraphine. You've lost your mind." "I saw everything," I whispered. The photos, the messages. Silence fell. He put the knife down, exhaled, and said with the weariness of a man relieved to stop pretending, "Yes, I'm with her, and I needed it. You've changed. We can't be intimate. What did you expect?" Each word hit like a small stone, steady and cruel. But beneath the ache, something inside me steadied. The shock didn't shatter, it solidified. He waited for me to collapse, to plead, to beg him to stay. But I didn't. I simply said, "I want a divorce." The look on his face was almost comical. He couldn't believe that the woman he had humiliated could still speak with such calm. Some battles are won not with anger, but with the quiet certainty of a door closing. That night, I didn't cry. I packed only what mattered: our baby's clothes, a few bottles, a photograph of my mother smiling by the sea. Every zipper, every folded blanket was a declaration. I choose myself. As I stepped out, the night was cold, the moon high. The air stung my face, but it felt clean, real. Behind me, Gideon's house glowed faintly through the curtains, an illusion I would never return to. I walked into the dark with my son pressed against my chest. Each heartbeat against my skin was proof that I was still alive, still capable of rebuilding. And though fear whispered at my back, another voice, soft, steady, unmistakably mine, rose within me. "This is not the end," it said. "This is how freedom begins." In the days that followed, I stayed at my mother's house. The walls smelled of jasmine and warm bread. She didn't ask questions. She simply held me when I finally allowed myself to fall apart. Some nights, I stared at the screenshots stored on my phone. They no longer hurt the way they once did. They were evidence, but also closure, proof that I had walked through the fire and survived the burn. One afternoon, I deleted them all. Every image, every word. Not to forget, but to make space for silence, for peace, for beginnings. Healing, I learned, isn't loud. It's the sound of your own heartbeat slowly matching the rhythm of your life again. And as I rocked my son to sleep, I knew some revenge doesn't need witnesses. It's enough to live well, to breathe freely, and to never look back. The first night back in my mother's house was the hardest. It smelled like cinnamon and old books, the same scent that used to mean safety when I was a child. But now it meant retreat, not refuge. I put the baby down in the cradle that had once been mine. The wooden frame creaked with history. My mother stood in the doorway, her eyes saying all the things she didn't. She didn't ask for explanations. She simply placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "Sleep. Tomorrow will find its own words." That night, I couldn't. I sat in front of the mirror, the one that had seen me through teenage tears and first heartbreaks. My reflection was a stranger again, eyes hollow, skin pale, heart raw. I wanted to scrub him out of me, the smell of his cologne, the echo of his lies, the image he stole. But grief doesn't leave on command. It lingers like fog, shaping itself into memories that refuse to fade. Still, I whispered to the mirror, "You're here, you're breathing. That's enough for now." Healing doesn't start with strength. It begins with survival. Morning came with birdsong and the soft hum of the kettle downstairs. For the first time in months, I woke to silence that wasn't waiting to be broken. The baby stirred beside me, his tiny hand reaching out in sleep. I touched his fingers and realized how much of myself I still had to give. I didn't have a husband anymore, but I had a reason to rise. I fed him slowly, watching the light shift across the curtains. Every movement, every sigh was proof of life mine and his. Later, while folding laundry, I caught my reflection in the window. My face looked tired but grounded. There was something fierce in the exhaustion, like a flame refusing to die. I remembered the screenshots, the evidence I had once saved like holy scripture. They sat in my phone, cold and waiting. I opened them one last time, not to hurt, but to honor the woman who had faced them without looking away. Then I pressed delete. One photo after another disappeared into digital ash. It didn't feel like losing. It felt like reclaiming space. Sometimes, closure is not forgetting what happened. It's deciding it no longer belongs inside you. Weeks passed. Motherhood became a rhythm feed. Rock, breathe, repeat. Some nights, exhaustion felt like drowning in slow motion. But I no longer felt invisible. I joined a small fitness class at the local center. The first day, my legs trembled just climbing the stairs. The mirrors on the walls terrified me. I didn't want to see what he had mocked. But the instructor smiled kindly, told me to go at my own pace. So I did. 5 minutes became 10. 10 became 20. Sweat stung my eyes and my breath came ragged, but with each drop, something loosened inside me. At home, when I undressed for the shower, I looked at myself differently. The stretch marks were no longer proof of ruin. They were proof of creation. The scar on my abdomen, once shame, now looked like a doorway, not a wound. I remembered his words, "You don't attract me like before." I said them out loud once, then laughed a sound halfway between pain and triumph. The body he ridiculed had carried life. His cruelty carried nothing at all. My mother often found me sitting by the window at dawn, holding my tea in silence. "Thinking again?" she would ask. "Remembering," I'd say. I thought about all the small moments that had built the woman I used to be, the one who waited, who excused, who apologized for existing too loudly. Now, I practiced stillness without apology. When the baby slept, I read again. I painted small things, trees, waves, hands reaching for light. I didn't post them anywhere. They weren't for display. They were proof that my hands could still create, not just endure. One afternoon, a neighbor dropped by with groceries. She looked at me, no makeup, hair undone, and said, "You look peaceful." It startled me. I hadn't realized I did. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Peace doesn't arrive like thunder. It seeps in, like light through a crack you once called broken." I began to write letters I would never mail, to Gideon, to Alara, to the woman I used to be. In one, I wrote, "I forgive you, but not for you for me, because carrying anger is like wearing a coat of fire. It burns everything except the cold. Oh." In another, "I hope she never learns the language of your lies, but if she does, I hope she leaves before she forgets her own name." I folded the letters neatly and placed them in a box, along with hospital bracelets, ultrasound photos, and a single earring I'd lost the night I left him. It wasn't mourning. It was archiving a gentle burial of a life that no longer fit. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't absolution. It's reclamation of power. It was on a Sunday morning when I finally stood in front of the mirror again, naked, unguarded, unashamed. The same mirror that had watched me break now watched me breathe. My body was softer, my eyes older, my spirit quieter, but the reflection staring back was alive, present, whole. I touched my stomach, my face, my hair. Each imperfection was a story, each scar a paragraph I had earned. For the first time, I whispered, "Thank you," to the woman in the mirror, not for surviving him, for surviving myself. There's a kind of beauty that only exists after destruction, the kind that doesn't beg to be seen, only to be understood. Months later, I returned to work, small accounting office, quiet people, the smell of paper and coffee. It felt like walking on new legs. Some days were hard. I missed the baby. I doubted my choices. I questioned my strength. But each paycheck, each laugh with a coworker, each bedtime story read without tears, these were small proofs that I was building again. One afternoon, during lunch, I received an email from Gideon. Subject line, "I'm sorry." I didn't open it. Not because I hated him, but because I didn't need to. I deleted it without hesitation. That act, so simple, so ordinary, felt more powerful than any revenge I could imagine. I looked out the window, saw my reflection faintly in the glass, calm, resolute, free. And I realized I no longer needed a photo, a message, or anyone's approval to prove who I was. My life itself was the proof. The truest revenge is to become everything they said you couldn't be, and to do it quietly, without ever looking back. The gym smelled like floor polish and paper. Rows of folding chairs faced a whiteboard that promised newsletters and field trips. I sat near the end, an easy exit in case the past decided to follow me in. My son tugged at my sleeve, then settled with his crayons, drawing circles that touched in the middle like linked hands. "Is anyone sitting here?" a voice asked. I shook my head without looking up. He sat carefully, as if not to startle the chair or me. When I glanced over, he was already looking away, reading the paper the teacher had handed out. A small, deliberate courtesy. The kind of respect that says, "I know you have been asked for too much before. I won't add to it." We compared calendars, shared a pen, and laughed at the same typo bake sale volunteers do last week. He introduced himself. "Andre, my son's in Miss Cole's class." His voice carried the low music of patience. No performance, no practiced charm, just presence. When the meeting ended, we didn't linger. We stacked chairs, gathered crayons, and shared a nod that felt complex and simple at once. Outside, the winter air pressed cool against my jaw. I walked to the bus stop and realized my shoulders were not drawn up around my ears. We had barely said 10 sentences. Somehow, they felt like 20 soft blankets. Some people enter your life with a doorbell. Others arrive like a light turned on in another room. He texted a week later, numbers swapped only to coordinate a field trip. "If you're early at pickup, there's a cafe across the street with decent muffins." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a test. It was a permission slip I could sign or ignore. I went. Daylight felt safer. The cafe had fogged windows and a bell that chimed like a memory. He stood to greet me, then sat only after I had. He didn't comment on my hair, my dress, my body. He asked about my son's favorite books, my work, whether I had found time to read anything I loved just for me. I told him about a novel that had once taught me how to breathe slower. He told me about a tree he planted the year his father died, how the roots found water his grief could not. We spoke in first drafts and quiet revisions. No one tried to impress the other into disappearing. I noticed something new. My back did not ache from bracing. My jaw never tightened, waiting for the moment he would take more than I offered. We parted with a small wave, no promises. Alone on the sidewalk, I smiled at the simple dignity of it, coffee with no currency. Safety doesn't ask you to shrink, it makes room for you to unfold. At the park, a father took photos of his daughter on the swing, quick bursts of joy trapped in pixels. The sound click, click, click fractured the afternoon. I knew it was not about me. It still was. My pulse stumbled. The grass tilted. For a breath, I was back in the fogged bathroom, towel slipping, privacy thin to glass. My son tugged my hand. "Mama, push me," he said, bright and unknowing. "Of course," I whispered, leaning into the swing, into the living weight of the present. On the bench nearby, Andre looked up from his thermos. He didn't move toward me. He didn't ask, "Are you okay?" in a way that would make the moment about his concern. He met my eyes, nodded once a steadying, quiet bridge. I pushed the swing. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm carried me out of the echo. By the 10th, the camera sound had folded into the afternoon, part of the world but not of me. "Thanks," I said later, as our sons compared sticks like treasure. "For what?" he asked. "For not rescuing me." He smiled. "I figured you knew the way out. I just kept the door from swinging shut." Healing is not the absence of echoes. It's the choice to walk through them without losing your name. My life grew a spine of rituals. Oatmeal at 7, spreadsheets at 9, emails answered with commas and kindness, bedtime at 8:30 with a book that rhymed the moon with spoons. On Sundays, I painted small things, blue ceramic cups, the shadow of fern leaves on a wall, 2 hands in the same bowl of water. Andre's presence lived at the edges. He once carried our science project, the one with planets glued slightly off orbit when the rain surprised us. Another time, he fixed the wheel on my son's scooter and left a note. "Tighten the bolt, test before hills." He never asked to come in. I never felt compelled to invite. Instead, we stood in doorways and talked until the cold asked us to decide. Sometimes I offered tea in paper cups. Sometimes he said no, then walked away slowly, as if time were a friend he was stubbornly patient with. Trust didn't bloom. It climbed small green thoughts, finding purchase in the roughness, spreading where light met brick. The heart is a house. The rooms you keep locked say as much about you as the rooms you keep warm. The phone rang late. An old ringtone I had assigned to a past life and never changed. I watched it crawl across the screen, his name trying to find a place in my room. I didn't touch it. The call died. A message arrived. "I'm sorry, I've been thinking. Can we talk?" Another followed, then the old architecture of blame with a fresh coat of sweet. I made mistakes because I was hurting. You know how it was. I put the phone face down and made tea. Not defiance practice. Some habits you break by repetition of gentler habits. A different buzz. Andre. Roads icy tomorrow. If you're driving, go slow. Made soup. Got extra. Can leave on your porch if you want. No pressure. No need to respond. The message fit inside the moment without swelling to eclipse it. I wrote back, "Thank you. We're good tonight. Stay warm." He replied with a pot emoji and a snowflake. I laughed quiet, unperformed. I slept deeply, like a person who had declined an argument and chosen a blanket instead. Not every apology is an opening. Sometimes it's a loop. We move like two adults who understand dignity and triage. Gratitude arrives without debt. At midnight, my son's cheeks burned. Fever spiked fast. Panic prepared its speech. I paced the small hallway, cooling cloths and water sips, counting breaths like beads. My mother slept through nothing. She rose, steadied me with practiced hands. Still, the car was buried in snow, and the pediatric clinic had moved across town while I wasn't watching. I texted Andre 3 words I disliked needing to send. "Need pharmacy run?" His answer landed almost before my doubt could form. On it. Front porch in 20. No need to open door. I heard his steps, careful on the ice. A bag rustled. A knock, knuckles soft on wood. By the time I opened, he was already halfway down the path, not turning, not asking for anything from the moment but the safety it required. We measured doses. The fever broke before dawn surrendered its last star. At 7, there was another message on my phone. "How's our astronaut?" I sent a photo of a thumbs up wrapped in a blanket. He replied with a rocket. I saved it for no reason except that it felt like a small flag planted on new ground. There is a difference between help that keeps a scorecard and help that keeps a promise. We gave the boys the park and ourselves the bench. The sun leaned over the trees. A dog failed gloriously at catching a frisbee. We traded stories of ordinary hardness, overflowing sinks, deadlines that refused to negotiate, fathers who taught us the value of an unbroken promise. He asked nothing big. I told nothing I wasn't ready to say. Still, the air between us felt arranged by trust rather than coincidence. On the way back, he walked on the traffic side. He didn't make a show of it. At the corner, he laughed when our sons negotiated the terms of a shared dinosaur. He bought the second coffee and forgot to make a ceremony of paying. I forgot to argue. It felt like 2 small rivers joining where the land welcomed them. At home, we built a solar system. Mars kept wobbling. We let it. Not everything wants to be perfectly still. When the door closed behind them, the echoes inside the house were friendly. I stood in the kitchen, palms on the counter, and let a word form without hurry. Maybe. You don't have to run toward a good thing. You can walk toward it and arrive just... He texted on a Thursday. Gallery opening Saturday. Local painters. Daylight people. Snacks with names on small cards. "Wanna go?" The description made me laugh. It also disarmed every reflex that once dressed up fear as wisdom. I said yes. On Saturday, I wore a black dress that forgave everything and asked for nothing. In the mirror, I looked like a woman who had learned what to carry and what to put down. He met me at the door with a quiet, "You look at ease." It was the best compliment anyone had given me in years. We wandered between canvases. a seascape that felt like exhale, a portrait of a girl whose eyes refused to surrender, a minimal line drawing titled "Home is a Verb." We talked about color the way people talk about weather when they mean everything else. He didn't reach for my hand. I didn't want him to. But as we stood before a painting of a window half open to a blue field, I felt the weight of my ribs loosen, just a little. Later, we shared olives that resisted the toothpick and laughed like conspirators in a minor heist. He walked me to my door and didn't step over the threshold. "Good night, Seraphine," he said. "Good night, Andre." I closed the door on a heart that wasn't racing because it didn't fear being chased. When love returns healthy, it doesn't demand to be named. It lets you learn its shape by how your breath behaves. Spring leaned into the rooms before the calendar did. I opened the windows, and the house exhaled. Our boys invented games that required rules only they understood. We provided snacks and occasional diplomacy. I worked, I mothered, I painted, I cooked soup that tasted like patience. Andre's chair at my table had no name, no title, no claim. Some evenings it was occupied, some evenings it belonged to the quiet. Both felt correct. We built nothing heavy. We built what we could carry. One night, after dishes and homework and a long bath that turned the bathroom into a small cloud, I lit a candle. No holiday, no ritual I had earned, just flame, shaped like a small vow. I watched it steady itself, then remembered how I used to blow candles out to make wishes. Not this time. I let it burn. I thought of the old story. A photo used like a weapon, a body mocked, a trust broken. I thought of the new story. A window half open to a blue field, a hand that didn't reach unless invited, a life with air in it. People say revenge like a firework. Mine was a garden. It did not explode. It grew. I tucked my son into bed. He asked if the stars get lonely when the moon is new. I said no. They keep one another company while the dark teaches us to see. In the mirror, the woman looked back at me with a gaze I recognized, not the one I had before, but the one I had earned. I touched the glass, then my chest. The distance between the two felt finally, mercifully, small. Happiness is not an argument you win. It is a room you make and keep warm. I stared at the words for a long minute, my cursor hovering over the trash icon. It was a rainy Thursday, the kind of day when the sky forgets its color and the air hums with memory. I was at work, balancing invoices and deadlines, a version of life that made sense. I should have deleted it, but curiosity, that old, tired creature, lifted its head. Inside was a photo our son, taken years ago at the hospital. Gideon had cropped himself out, but I could still see his hand holding the baby. Below it, a line, "Can we meet, just to talk? I've changed." The thunder outside answered for me. That evening, when Andre came by to drop off a book my son had forgotten, he found me standing by the window, eyes distant. "Storm's coming," he said softly. "It's already here," I replied. "Sometimes the past doesn't knock, it sends lightning instead." "Seraphine," he said. "Please, just 5 minutes. I want to apologize in person." Apologies from him were weapons dressed in remorse. "I don't need an apology," I said. "Yes, you do," he insisted, his tone softening into that practiced plea. "You deserve closure." I almost laughed. Closure from the man who had stolen my privacy, my safety, my sleep. Closure had already happened the day I deleted his photos and walked into sunlight. But I knew why he was calling now. Word travels in small towns. Andre and I had been seen at the gallery laughing. My life looked whole again, and that was enough to make him restless. He wasn't seeking forgiveness. He was seeking relevance. I hung up. The storm outside began to pound harder, like it approved. When people can no longer own your heart, they try to own your narrative. That night, the electricity went out. Candles flickered along the counters, casting long shadows that danced against the walls. My son slept soundly upstairs. Andre texted to ask if we were safe, and I smiled at the thought he knew I could handle storms, but he still checked anyway. I boiled water on the gas stove, the hiss like a heartbeat in the dark. As I stirred tea, I thought of how many nights I had stood in this same room trembling from fear instead of thunder. I took out the box from my closet, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were things I'd kept too long: hospital bracelets, letters unsent, fragments of a past I no longer needed to carry. I laid them on the table, one by one. They looked small under the candlelight, like relics of someone else's story. One letter began with, "Dear Gideon." I skimmed it. It was full of explanations, apologies, justifications for loving too much. I fed it to the flame. The paper curled, edges blackening into whispers. The fire didn't rage. It glowed a slow, patient hunger, consuming what no longer belonged. When the last scrap turned to ash, I felt the room exhale. Forgiveness isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's fire. 2 days later, he showed up, unannounced, as if he still owned the right to proximity. The knock was sharp, familiar. My son was in school. I opened the door halfway, my hand still on the latch. "Seraphine," he said, drenched from rain. "I just need to talk." "You shouldn't be here," I replied. He smiled, that same disarming curve he'd once used to win every argument. "You look good," he said, as if compliment were currency. "I'm not yours to look at," I answered. He stepped closer, voice dropping. "I miss what we had. We could try again for our son." The old me would have trembled, confused care for control. But now his words landed and sank like stones in water heard, but no longer felt. "You're not here for our son," I said. "You're here because you lost the audience to your guilt." He blinked, taken aback. "You've changed," he said finally. "Thank you," I replied, and shut the door. The lock clicked softly. It didn't sound like defiance. It sounded like peace. There is a kind of strength that doesn't raise its voice. It just doesn't reopen the door. The storm raged for 2 nights straight. Wind howled through the trees like something trying to get in, but inside the house, everything held. I sat by the window, watching rain carve paths down the glass. My son slept with a flashlight on, its beam cutting the dark in a small circle of safety. When lightning flashed, I saw my reflection in the glass steady, unflinching. Once, storms had terrified me. Now, they felt almost sacred, because they reminded me that chaos could exist without destroying everything. Andre called late that night. His voice was low, warm. "Power's out here too," he said. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, smiling. "Actually, better than fine." "Good," he said. "You sound like the calm after." "Oh." I looked at the candle beside me, flame steady even as the wind screamed outside. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's exactly what it feels like. Healing isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, it's learning you've become the shelter." In the morning, I wrote a letter not to him but to myself. It began simply, "You made it here. You did not need anyone to carry you across." I wrote about the girl who once mistook silence for peace, the woman who learned that privacy is sacred, the mother who built safety from the ground up. I sealed the letter and placed it in the same box where his ashes of apology had burned. This time the box was empty, clean. I would keep it that way. Later, I took my son for a walk. The storm had left everything rinsed, colors sharper, air clear. Puddles mirrored the sky, broken clouds drifting like survivors. He held my hand and said, "The world smells new." "It is," I told him. "Sometimes the world has to break before it remembers what it's made of. Peace isn't a place you arrive at. It's a direction you keep walking toward." That evening, Andre came by with soup again. He didn't ask about the visit. Maybe he'd already guessed. We ate quietly, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint drip of water outside. When he left, he paused at the doorway. "You know," he said, "you don't have to keep being strong all the time." I smiled. "I'm not. I'm just being." He nodded, understanding. Then he touched the doorframe, not me, and said, "The storm's over." After he left, I turned off the lights. The candle I'd lit 2 nights ago was still burning small, unwavering, patient. Its flame cast a reflection on the window, my face beside its glow. It was strange how something so fragile could outlast thunder, but maybe that's what strength really is. Not defiance, but endurance. Not noise, but light that stays when everything else is gone. I blew out the candle, and the smoke curled upward like a sigh. The scent of wax and air filled the room, proof that fire can end softly. Sometimes, victory looks like peace. Sometimes, the loudest scream is silence. Weeks later, I told this story to a small circle of women at a community center, faces etched with different versions of my own history. When I spoke of betrayal, they nodded. When I spoke of leaving, they breathed out. When I spoke of peace, their eyes shone. At the end, a young woman asked, "How do you stop the anger?" I smiled. "You don't," I said. "You learn to burn cleaner." She didn't understand at first, so I told her, "Anger is energy. It's proof you cared. But if you feed it long enough, it eats your joy." So I gave mine a new home. I turned it into boundaries, into art, into calm. That's the real firelight. After the meeting, I walked home under a sky rinsed by rain. My son slept early, curled like forgiveness itself. I sat by the window one last time, the city lights flickering in the distance, each one a reminder, even in darkness, something always glows. There's a kind of fire that doesn't destroy, it illuminates. A full year had passed since the night of the storm. The seasons had moved through my house like patient teachers, summer softening into fall, fall folding into silence, and winter finally surrendering to light. I had expected healing to feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like stillness. Like waking up one morning and realizing the ache had stopped whispering your name. My life had become simple, deliberate. Work, breakfast, laughter that didn't need to be explained. I no longer checked my phone expecting ghosts. The screenshots, the proofs, the burns of the past, they had turned to dust, just like the woman who needed them. Andre and I never spoke of the past, not because it was forbidden, but because it no longer ruled the room. He understood silence the way some people understand music. He filled it without breaking it. There was no grand romance, no cinematic climax, just two people who met each other in the middle of real life, breathing in sync with the ordinary. And that was the miracle. Healing is not the erasure of pain, it's the quiet decision to live gently beside what once hurt. It began with a small patch of earth behind the house, a neglected corner tangled with weeds and old roots. One morning I decided to turn it into something else. My son helped me dig. He didn't understand the metaphor that we were unearthing more than soil, but his laughter was enough. We planted marigolds, lavender, and rosemary. Their scents would fill the air weeks later, stubborn and alive. Every seed we pressed into the ground was a kind of prayer, unspoken, wordless, but full of intention. I wanted him to grow up seeing life as something we tend, not something we endure. When the first blossoms came, I thought of all the nights I'd been too tired to believe in growth. And yet, here they were, proof that even what's been buried can return with color. I found myself humming while watering them, a tune I didn't recognize. It must have come from the same place the peace did quietly, after the noise was done. What you water remembers. Even if it takes a year, or 10, something always grows back. Spring came early that year. The light through my kitchen window stretched farther across the floor, painting everything it touched in soft gold. I caught my reflection in that light one morning, barefoot, hair undone, eyes steady. And for a heartbeat, I saw her again, the woman from the bathroom mirror, the one who had flinched at her own reflection. But this time, she smiled back. The light didn't hide the scars, it framed them. The faint line across my abdomen from childbirth, the marks that stretched like rivers across my hips, each one a sentence from a story I no longer apologized for. I realized then that beauty was never meant to be perfection. It was endurance, the kind that stays when youth fades, when storms pass, when men leave. Later, I took my son to the park. He ran toward the swings, shouting, "Mama, look at me!" He was laughing so freely that strangers smiled just watching him. And in that laughter, I heard my own name again, not the one Gideon had once said in anger or mockery, but the one I had whispered back into existence, Seraphine. Light doesn't erase what's broken, it simply refuses to let it stay in shadow. It happened by accident. A grocery store aisle, a half-empty basket, and him, Gideon. For a moment, the years collapsed. The hum of the refrigerator, the chatter of strangers, it all dimmed. He looked older, thinner, his eyes searching mine for a script that no longer existed. "Seraphine," he said softly, "you look, well, I am," I replied. He hesitated, as if expecting bitterness. When none came, he looked almost disappointed. "I wanted to say," he began, but I cut him gently. "You don't need to." He nodded, looking at the floor. His voice trembled on the edges of apology. I was wrong, he said. About everything. I smiled, not out of forgiveness, but understanding. You were, I said, and I was right to leave. We stood in silence for a moment, two people who had shared a life, now strangers with matching ghosts. As I turned to leave, he said, I heard you're happy. I am, I said again, this time without flinching. Outside, sunlight spilled across the parking lot. I breathed it in steady, clean final. Some ghosts disappear not because you banish them, but because they finally realize they can't live where peace has moved in. That night, I wrote a letter for my son to read when he's older. I didn't tell him about the photos or the betrayal, not yet. That part of the past could wait. But I told him about love, about respect, about the kind of strength that doesn't hurt to hold. I wrote, You were born from pain, yes, but you were raised in peace. And that's what matters. When you love someone someday, don't love them for how they look in light. Love them for how they stay beside you in the dark. I sealed the letter and placed it in the same box where my first apology to myself had lived. It felt right that they should rest together, truth beside hope. Motherhood is the art of turning wounds into warnings your children won't have to repeat. Months later, we went to the sea. Andre, my son, and I stood where the waves brushed the sand like fingertips. The horizon was endless, a ribbon of fading fire. I watched my son run ahead, chasing foam, his laughter carried away by wind. Andre came to stand beside me. You look far away, he said. Not far, I answered. Just deep. He smiled. There's peace in that. We didn't hold hands. We didn't need to. Our presence was enough, a shared silence more intimate than any vow. The waves whispered against the shore, a soft applause for everything we had survived. I bent down, let the water touch my skin. It was cold, honest, and alive. For a moment, I saw the reflection of the three of us blurred, shifting with the tide. And I realized that even though nothing stays still, that's what makes it beautiful. Healing is not a destination, it's a tide. It leaves, it returns, but it always carries you home. Back home, the air smelled of salt and evening. My son was asleep before I finished unpacking. Andre was gone, leaving a note on the counter. You left your hat on the beach. I'll keep it safe until next time. I smiled. That next time was not a promise, it was an open door. I lit a candle again, as I once did during the storm, and placed it by the window. Outside, the wind hummed softly, but it no longer sounded like warning. I whispered to the flame, not as prayer but as gratitude, for the pain that taught me, for the silence that healed me, and for the love that didn't need to save me to stay. The candle flickered, steady as breath. I sat by its light, letting the warmth reach the corners of the room and the corners of myself. I thought about every version of me that had existed. The girl who trusted too easily, the woman who broke in silence, the mother who rebuilt from ashes. They all lived here, inside this calm, not erased, integrated. I no longer feared my past. I carried it like a map creased, torn, but still guiding me toward light. To be reborn is not to start over, it's to walk forward knowing the ashes beneath your feet once kept you warm. I was not what he destroyed. I was what survived. I tell this story now not because it's unique, but because it isn't. Because there are women listening who have lived versions of this silence, who have mistaken endurance for love and survival for shame. To them I say, you are not what was done to you. You are what you choose to build after. The mirror can show scars, but it can also show a face that refused to vanish. And if you are still in the fire, hold on. The ashes you fear are only proof that you have burned, and therefore, you have lived. The world will tell you to forgive too soon, to forget too fast. Don't. Let your heart take its own time to cool. Then, when it's ready, light your own candle not for them, but for yourself. Because peace is not given, it's made. Every day you wake up and choose to breathe softer instead of bitter, you are rebuilding the world. Healing is rebellion. Peace is revolution.